Welcome to the Building Web3 podcast. Today, we're going to be talking all about DAOs with my friend Ian. I'm going to take the perspective that I know nothing about DAOs. So if you're coming in here and you're like, I don't know that much about DAOs. Stick around because we're going to go from like a 101 level to a 301 level. So Ian, just to start this off, what is a DAO?
Yeah, let's just jump right into it. Well, the most fundamental way I describe to people what a DAO is, and I have described to people what a DAO is over the years, is it's a shared account on-chain, on the blockchain usually, so on an open database, and people use that account to vote on things they care about, and they decide what things to vote on and what things to action, what actions to take based on a vision. So in an even simpler sense, a DAO is a shared account like a bank account, but in this case, a cryptocurrency account, a shared vision, and a group of people who believe in that vision and want to use that account to achieve things related to that vision.
And then when we're talking about an account here, let's go so 101. Are we saying that, hey, this is some kind of smart contract that multiple people have like governance over, or is this some kind of like wallet, or is this something else entirely?
That's a good question. In a lot of ways, it can be both, but the easiest way to think about it is it usually starts with a wallet. So it usually starts with something like a MetaMask or a Phantom wallet if you're on Solana, just a wallet that more than one person has access to, because in most cases, a DAO requires multiple people to sign off on a transaction for it to happen. And you use the funds in the wallet to accomplish things related to the vision of the DAO. So that can be more social impact oriented or otherwise, such as just achieving growth with a technology like a company does.
Yeah, let's talk about some common DAOs. What are some of the most successful DAOs that you've seen, and then we can kind of go a bit into how they're structured.
Yeah, great question. So I put these in a few buckets first. When we talk about the most successful DAOs, there's something like a social impact DAO, as it's commonly called, something that looks and functions like a charity on an open database. Then there's a big bucket of what we'd call protocol DAOs, which if you're in crypto at all, or even if you're not, you can just think of them as DAOs that decide the present and future actions of a technology network, or even more simply, because this can even happen in this way. In the future, I believe social media will be DAO-ified, which means the future Facebook, everything would be voted on by the users and every other group involved, the users, the developers, the people who created the app, and so on. So in that case, another kind of DAO would be app DAOs. And then if you think of it on the protocol level, that would be like the network where a bunch of apps live, or the database on which a bunch of apps live. And all of that is decided by a collective group of people that are involved with all of the apps, or just some of the apps, or even just one of the apps. So there's protocol DAOs mainly, there's social impact DAOs, and there's things like app DAOs. And that's not even all the categories, but that's a decent start. And then when we think about the most well-known DAOs right now, today in the world, social impact and protocol DAOs go above the rest in terms of what they've accomplished. Protocol DAOs in terms of the sheer amount of money they manage and the sheer amount of things they do to help these networks like Uniswap or Compound or almost anything in DeFi succeed through the collective vision of everyone involved. And social impact DAOs like Ukraine DAO, or several DAOs I was involved with for women's rights and other issues that help people achieve things related to those issues together. So the difference there is, instead of like a traditional charity where there's a board of directors, it's everyone who cares about that issue voting together on what to do. A collectively run organization is the simplest way I explain it. Same thing with protocol DAOs, a collectively run organization, but a collectively run organization to, for example, decide the present and future of a decentralized crypto exchange like Uniswap. So yes, Uniswap has a foundation-like entity, Uniswap Labs, that created the technology, but right now it's DAO-ified. All these different groups can decide the future of trading there and everything else related. So yeah, to put it simply, to summarize all of that, I think about DAOs like Uniswap. I think about the sheer amount of impact the Ukraine DAO made with over $7 million of full impact over the course of its life. And I think about those two buckets together when I start to think about the most successful DAOs today. But we also have other nascent, newer forms of DAOs. One that I mentioned, app DAOs. There are some apps out today trying to DAOify things, trying to make the present and the future of the app decided by, for example, the users, the creators, and the developers together. And I think that's a beautiful thing because that helps us really get to an internet that's collectively run, which we can talk about more, but that's why I'm here. That's one reason. I love helping people understand these things and just helping people. And then I believe the internet should be fairer like that.
And let's talk a little bit about governance for some of these like larger DAOs, because I think this is an area that often, pops up. So you may have some people that are a bit bearish on like democracy or be like, well, I asked everyone what their opinion was. That's a surefire way to get the wrong answer. So talk to us a little bit about what happens in these DAOs. Is there like governance tokens that get issued? How do you make sure that there's not one person making all the decisions? How do you make sure it's not just like the people that have the least amount of connections to the DAO, like you still incentivizing people that are the most knowledgeable?
Yeah, first kicking that off, that's a great question because that is an issue. There's two sides to that. There's people who say that's not an issue and they're more on the radical side of like everything should just be the swarm, and that's fine. Maybe some things will work well that way. But then there's people who believe DAOs won't work at all because of what we just said. And I believe the answer lies somewhere in the middle. To be more specific, I'll use the example to kick things off of Vita DAO, the longevity biotech DeSci DAO that's pretty popular right now. And VitaDAO has a really interesting governance model that protects it against like the people with the least experience making decisions in areas that they don't understand. To be more specific on that, they do that by cutting everything into a few work streams. You come into the DAO through those work streams, and when you come in, you prove your experience in those areas before you get started. So when you get started, they already know that, for example, you have experience raising money for biotech startups. That's basically one of their work streams, deal flow. Or in the other case, being a researcher, working in labs, people that create things in biotech and longevity like that. You are an actual researcher, you are a scientist, you are something like that related. That's another work stream. So this is something I'm bullish on. I don't think it hurts a DAO at all to both let everyone have a say, but also at the same time, let certain people have, quote, the most say when they've proven their background in a certain area like that. So to move that over a little bit too, at Push DAO, what we do is similar. We have marketing work streams. We have a grants sub DAO and other things. And for example, with the grants program, we make sure people have experience with relevant things before they get very directly involved working on that with us, such as not just reviewing grants and things like that, but being a developer, understanding the code that might come into the apps that apply to our grants program. Technical reviewers are invaluable there. Or in the marketing sub-DAO, they have actual marketing, actual social media experience, verifiable on paper, so to speak, or LinkedIn or anywhere else. So I'm bullish on proving yourself via work streams. I don't think it's a bad idea to think about DAOs as very meritocratic like that, or however you'd like to say that. That's kind of how I think about it. And yeah, that's the number one way. It's not the only way, but the number one way I begin to think about that question of protecting a DAO against the people who don't have experience in certain areas, controlling the wrong areas.
Mm-hmm. So they come in through these work streams as an example, and then are they issued maybe like a token or some kind of NFT being like, Jax is a non-practicing engineer. So we'll give him like, he can do some code reviews, but don't let him get too deep into the weeds because he's like just not on the front lines anymore.
Yeah, that's a great question. In an ideal state, that would be exactly what happens. You wouldn't just have an application process. You wouldn't just have people reviewing that like I was talking about, but you would also have what you just said, something like an NFT further reviewing that, bucketing outward splitting the people, like you just suggested, from active developers or active engineers to like non-active engineers who still have the experience, so that you have further differentiation, and not just that both of these groups can participate in the work stream or the sub DAO, but exactly how they can participate, and even more finely, the very the smallest potential tasks that they can and can't be doing in the work stream. I'm bullish on that too. I think that's a great thing to be thinking about. To be clear, some DAOs don't have the resources, even don't have the time to do that because things move so quickly in day one. But my advice to people like that who haven't done it yet would be, if you're in year one right now, think about making further changes like that in year two. Because also, if you make too many changes at once in a DAO or try to change things at the wrong time, that can derail everything, because people get obviously very nervous. There's a lot of disagreement, and maybe voter turnout doesn't turn out the way you want it to be for those issues at the time.
Absolutely. So we've gone over basic governance. Let's talk a little bit about the Treasury itself, because I think this is an area people are like, where does the money come from? Like, is it, you try to get like a big whale like Vitalik or like an Optimism Foundation to give you guys initial funding? Like, where does most of the DAO treasury go? And then we can get into treasury management, because I think that's an interesting topic.
I agree on both, and I'm experienced in both, so I love talking about that. To kick that off too, one of the first things I think about with regards to where the money comes from is not just where it comes from day one, but where it needs to go after you already know that. To be more specific on that, most DAOs that are protocol DAOs, like Push or like Uniswap or like Compound, they start out in some way similar to or exactly like this, like the foundation who created the network or the protocol or both seeds the DAO. So they have a percentage of the initial funds they raised that were always meant for a DAO. That usually comes from the community allocation when you look at the initial fundraisers and the percentages there. But the idea is that ideally in 1 year, but in some cases in 2 or 3 years, you move away from that into a more sustainable model. What I mean, that's where we get to the second part of what I said. So what I mean by that is, if you're, for example, a DAO that supports a blockchain network like Ethereum, it just has a bunch of applications on it, and you're supposed to decide the future of that network. If you got seeded by a foundation from day one, ideally in 12 months or less, you should have a more sustainable model of getting money for the future. And that should be something like a percentage of network fees in perpetuity. In some cases, you have apps that become blockchains or something like that. And then that's why I mentioned it can take 2 years or more, because it already takes a ton of work to turn an app or a set of smart contracts into a full-scale chain or something like that. So sometimes you have to delay that. You have to make sure the network's robust enough to be giving a bunch of fees to the DAO in perpetuity. You have a certain date in mind in which you want to make that transition from dependence on a centralized foundation for money to fully decentralized money. But yeah, to sum all that up, the ideal state for a DAO budget is the second part of what I said, is network fees in perpetuity. And to get even more granular, because I know people who ask about this all the time, you need somewhere between 1% and 10% or more of the total budget of the network in perpetuity. And I'm bullish on more, but I'm just saying lower because I know what a lot of people are doing, and a lot of people are doing far less to start things out.
So now we've got our treasury funded. Let's talk a little bit about the management of those funds in general, because if you have like a bunch of different stakeholders or a bunch of different voters, like, talk to us a little bit about like how those funds actually get distributed, and how, like, I assume these could be like privy to attacks of like trying to just get as many voters to be like, hey, distribute as many fees as possible to governance token holders.
Yeah, so talking about distribution, there's a couple ways to think about that. You mentioned some of the most important ways to think about it, but to dive a little deeper there, the first thing you need to think about from day one when you're distributing the funds you've received, for example, from a foundation, is what are the most essential activities we need to do to get started right? That can be hard in some ways, that can be easier in other cases with different kinds of DAOs. But in a general sense, in the most macro sense, every DAO needs to first think, okay, I have the money, who needs to be paid from day one, such as a small group of delegates who will do most of the activities until you get more members in the DAO. And they will also be attracting more members into the DAO. If you have a group of people like that, they need to be paid from day one. Some kind of stipend plus a bonus is one way to think about that. Then, as far as further distribution, that goes downward in most cases into sub DAOs. So you thought about the delegates, you thought about whoever the council or however you want to think about that is, if you have a model like that, however they get paid. But then you think about, like, for example, what I said with Push DAO, what kind of money does the grants program need from day one? That's usually a very large percentage of the budget if you have a DAO that supports a grants program directly under it. Then after you do the grants program, the rest is for everything else in most cases, meaning there can even be cases where the grants program needs like 60% of the entire budget for the year, or maybe even more, because you really do need to be, as we know, that intensive to attract people into a grants program in crypto, especially in these days where there's just so many of them and they're all giving people similar amounts. But just going forward a little bit from that from now, then as you go, of course, you're attracting contributors. And before you do that, before that happens, you also need to think of distribution in the way of, and this is not easy, but it's true, what amounts or relative amounts you want to give people for certain positions in the sub-DAOs. If you don't have that in mind, you're going to be in for a chaotic time when different people with different backgrounds come in vying for the same positions. And especially if they figured out they're being paid vastly different from someone else doing a similar thing or something like that. You really should have some kind of standardized stipends plus bonuses from the earliest possible days to take away a lot of potential chaos from the council or the delegates or just the DAO as a whole. But another beautiful thing about distribution is you always need to think about it, like you said, of attracting voters. So some people listening to this may not know, but DAOs are doing a lot of things right. One thing they could do better is voter turnout is super low, especially, for example, compared to U.S. presidential elections. Some of these elections in the past years, we've had even 40 or more % turnout is what it seems like. But even if you just use that metric relatively, DAOs usually right now have 10% or less for voter turnout. So voter turnout is a hot button issue for DAOs right now. And I'm a big fan of any kind of innovative delegate program or any kind of innovative set of contests or ways that you think about attracting more people to vote. But my one tip there with distribution and just practically related to attracting people to vote is don't rely on just money. Think about other ways to do it too, because as we know with airdrops and things like that, the just money approach only lasts so long and it doesn't lead to long-term retention.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's you're attracting mercenaries, not missionaries. So talk to us a little bit about. So there's different governance systems. You could have like a voting process system. You need to create some kind of proposal system. There could be like a consensus system. Talk to us a little bit about like what the most successful DAOs are doing. Is it like, hey, our constituents are putting forward a proposal like, hey, we think that more, crypto, we want to fund more crypto education. So they put it together, there's a vote. Talk to us a little bit about how all of that works.
Yeah, so most DAOs actually have a similar model right now in that way. And what I mean is, in most cases, this delegate model is what the bulk of DAOs are using. So something akin to a small group of people representing the whole community, but anyone in the community in most cases as well can do a proposal, like you were saying, can have an idea and put it onto the DAO's forum, into the open marketplace, so to speak, where everyone talks about what can and can't be voted on. But in the bulk of cases, you have to have something like a sponsor for that proposal, or you just have to have the support of the majority of whoever these delegates are for it to pass. Because most DAOs are, and rightfully so, worried about protecting everything related to the overall strategy that the DAO was created for. So that's why they put into place these delegates and these people to represent the community rather than just everything being decided by the swarm. because they're worried that if they did anything differently, things wouldn't get accomplished towards the vision necessarily, because anyone could take away, hijack the vote for something that doesn't make any sense for the DAO at any time, at least in theory. So in most cases, to sum that up real quick, DAOs use some kind of representative model, something analogous to representative democracy. And in many cases, that means you're delegating your tokens temporarily, like in a smart contract, to someone else, but you can pull them out at basically any time if you don't like how that delegate's voting, which is another beautiful thing, because of course you have to have checks and balances even in the DAO, especially in the DAO, actually.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. So we've talked about governance. We've talked about the Treasury. One thing that I think maybe overlooked, or maybe I just overlooked it, is this autonomous aspect. So let's talk a little bit about how smart contracts play into the DAO and what, like essentially how they function there.
Yeah, so there's a couple ways we've touched on, but you're right. We should dive deeper into this because it actually, I don't think always consciously, sometimes unconsciously, but it quite often gets overlooked on different DAO related podcasts and events these days. People are overlooking the autonomous aspect, as you said. Some of the key ways that smart contracts play into DAOs today are not just the staking of votes or things like that, but there's other innovative measures being trialed. So one I would think about would be using smart contracts as skin in the game, not just for voting, but you can't even participate in the DAO unless you stake into a smart contract, which somehow monitors your participation. And for example, this is not necessarily the most ideal way, but your stake could get decreased, aka slashed, if you're doing a lot of things against the DAO or you're just not following the basic model of participating in votes the majority of the time. I'm personally okay with that. Some people don't like this idea of burning or slashing stake in DAOs. I'm okay with that because I think if you encode it correctly or as simply as possible, it's not that bad to say you're good as long as you participate in, for example, 8 out of 10 of every vote or something like that. And that could be monitored via Snapshot. There could be direct connections between the smart contracts and Snapshot. And then those smart contracts could check the wallet addresses who are voting, who are signaling with their tokens. And that's how they determine whether or not to slash stake or leave it as it is, or even give more rewards. Another thing, though, that's being talked about a lot these days is thinking about the autonomous aspect of DAOs with AI. So I'm bullish on that. We actually have several projects with potential there who are coming into our grants program in 2025. And one way I think AI will more directly impact DAOs and make them more autonomous is actually AI being a delegate, like we were talking about. So you delegate to the AI, and then you're like, wait, Ian, how do they even know what to do? How does the AI know like what a vote means and how to vote? Because just like you train ChatGPT on the past internet, you train, so to speak, these DAO AI delegates on past proposals and documents and everything related as much as possible. And then you launch them at a certain date when your AI team or someone like that is confident they can, through trials, that they can perform correctly in practice on these votes. So I'm bullish on AI delegates. And then another thing I'll quickly mention is when we think about the autonomous aspect of DAOs, I'm bullish on funds and treasury movements happening in the future in a very more autonomous fashion. So I think there's quite a case to be made for AI and DAOs dealing with more and more of the treasury management as we go on. Although, of course, there's a lot of security concerns and other things related to that. So that's why I don't think it's necessarily today that will happen.
Yeah, and then one aspect that I think is quite interesting is maybe the legal. I'm not a lawyer myself. The legal aspect, because like if I'm thinking about this myself, it's like if we wanted to create a DAO today, I'm like, God, I just have to spend a bunch of money on lawyers and figure out how to like get this set up in, I don't know, Wyoming or the Marshall Islands or wherever the heck you have to set it up. Talk to us a little bit about like the legal and like regulatory landscape. Like if we wanted to create a DAO today, how would we kind of go about that?
Well, it's not as easy as it should be, first of all. You're right to suggest, as you kind of did, that it's quite murky with the regulatory landscape. Although America is looking better in that way as it was in the recent past. Um, there's a couple frameworks, first of all, that most people use because they're proven, and in the way that they're so far proven to not cause you to be attacked by some regulator for not doing something correctly. So it's more of a proven to not have negative outcome than proven to be the go-to way, unfortunately. But I think we'll shift more to the go-to way for DAOs in the near future. Some are Wyoming DAOs, because that has the support of a lot of legislators, not just in Wyoming, but across America these days. A lot of DAOs as well, if they're really not looking to generate a profit ever and they are located somewhere in America, they can go the 501c3 route, from what I know. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but I am speaking from experience, not just doing these things, but from what my lawyer friends have said. So that's another thing to do when you're building a DAO. Have lawyer friends with experience with DAOs and ask them what the right model is, because there are lawyers like that. But another two that people may not know that much about that are international are one, some people are trialing the Swiss Foundation model. So there's the Swiss Foundation idea that with Switzerland's deep history in crypto and just their willingness to accept a lot of that innovation earlier than others, the Swiss Foundation can work. And then there's more nascent things like Dubai has a new framework, from what I understand, for DAOs. And then on top of all that, many DAOs just go the route of DEXs and other trading entities that have Cayman Islands entities or something like that, because they pick a jurisdiction for operations in which there's really no major negative regulatory oversight towards the crypto space. So that's a start, but I'll double down and just say, I think we have a while to go before we find the go-to model for DAOs, but I also, in a legal sense, but I also think that's okay. And there's a lot of work being done.
Now, one thing when we just talked about the Optimism Foundation the other day, and we'll have a meeting with the Solana Foundation today. Talk to us a little bit about the difference between like a DAO and a foundation, and why many of these ecosystems opt for foundations. And
well, number one is a foundation gives you more control, more direct control. People are just, and I don't blame them. And sometimes you don't need a DAO. People are just afraid of the implications of the DAO being like a way that, for example, one investor with 10 million of your token can just like walk in and be like, I'm the majority person now. This is my DAO and I'm going to vote on everything for myself. As we know, things like that have almost happened. And even with the compound incident with Humpty, that guy, it kind of did happen over this past year, at least a little bit, at least enough to make people scratch their heads and go, do I really want a DAO right now? Again, there's another moment like that. But another difference between foundations and DAOs is that people want to grow in a certain fashion. So they want to have not just that control, but they want to be able to have just the knowledge that they've locked down full-time employees. The investors want more oversight over the process. So it's not just about the company control, but investor control. And people also often want a foundation for the reason we just discussed, that they're like, wait a second, there really isn't any clear legal framework for DAOs. And I'm way more comfortable doing a framework I know works because I really want my startup to scale and I don't want regulators breathing down my neck. I can't actually say that enough. I think one of the reasons a lot of people who should or can DAO in this space haven't yet is just because they're like afraid of what they see as a totally opaque, a totally foggy landscape for DAO legal frameworks. Even though some exist, they're still like, yeah, but that's not really a standard. There's still too many drawbacks. So I think once we have even clearer legal frameworks, the world will be far more DAO-ified. And to clarify what I'm saying there, no, I don't believe everything will ever be a DAO, but I believe we'll get to the point in the world where the point in time in which everything is DAOified on a gradient scale. And we can get more into that, but basically I just mean people will take pieces of the model more and more over time, and it'll become the standard, but everyone will still be on different degrees of it. They don't all have to be totally community controlled entities.
Yeah, let's get more into that. So, talk to us a little bit about some of the trends you see. Like, where do we think DAOs will be in the next 1 to 2 years, and maybe similar to the partial DAO idea that you just referenced.
Yeah, so I'll touch on that first because that's a great question. When we think about this partial DAO idea, one logical use case that we see like trials and things like that and cool experiments happening with is loyalty programs. So that's a great example of a partial DAO. They'll let more and more, they'll have companies more and more architecting their loyalty programs so consumers can directly vote on a lot of things related to the brand, but they'll gate it off in certain ways. So they won't, it's not saying they're going to let consumers control the entire company treasury or say, you're an airline and I want you flying to my city. So I'm going to vote with everyone. And now you have to fly to my city and buy a bunch of planes to do that. They're not going to necessarily let people make operational decisions like that. Or, for example, Netflix may let people vote on the next month's movies in a list to be released in a DAO-ified format. But it's not saying that like Netflix will let people, again, make major operational decisions or hire and fire employees. So those are some examples. But as far as what might be on the other end, fully DAO-ified more than it is today, I think about, there are experiments here. I think about record labels. I think about just how broken the music industry is related to incentives for artists, artist-run collectives being more paramount. I think about more and more movements with technologies, with developers being totally open source DAOs. And a lot of them are today more than ever before, but I think it will be the standard for developers to get together around a language or any kind of movement and just DAOify it. Charities, we've mentioned that, inevitable for all of them to be DAOs in my mind for the most part. And then cool things like DAOified sports teams and things like that. Some people think that won't happen because early experiments have failed. I actually think that's inevitable. It won't happen in every case. You'll have some sports teams where it's like, we're blocking that. We'll just let you vote on more things. We'll let you vote on the new jerseys. We'll let you vote on some of the parts of the new stadium, things like that. But then on the other hand, you'll have organizations that are bought out by fans. And I think that's a cool thing to think about. Fans owning their favorite team could change a lot of things. And then just to throw in one more, I think cities even, it'll take longer, but they'll be more and more DAOified. You'll have more and more parts of the city controlled by the collective. But as far as if you asked me, will cities just be totally governed by DAOs? It's possible, but I think that's 20 plus years down the road. It's just going to take a lot of time.
A lot of time. Well, I feel like it's a very exciting and bright future. Where can people learn more about DAOs? Are there any resources you recommend they look into? Maybe any particular DAOs that you're like, I really like what these guys are up to?
Yeah, there's a lot of examples in that respect. But as far as, first of all, where you learn about DAOs, the biggest way beyond any book or blog or podcast or anything like that I've learned about DAOs is from working with people in other DAOs that have become mentors to me, just friends to me, just people whose work I enjoy learning about. So the number one advice I have is work in other DAOs. Find a DAO or a set of DAOs you're interested in for whatever reason you're interested in them and just dive in. And if you're nervous and you're like, wait, I can just dive in. Yes, you can, and you should. That's the best way to get involved in DAOs. Just jump into the forum or wherever they use as their way to connect, wherever their open marketplace for ideas is, and just introduce yourself. And DAOs have been, to me, one of the most welcoming spaces I've ever experienced. So someone will help you. And then in terms of what I'm bullish on or what other DAOs I'm bullish on everything social impact. I think charity is going to be the first one to break forward even further into the mainstream and show the rest of the world why DAOs work. We're not done with that. There's going to be a huge resurgence, especially after a lot of the events that have been happening in the world. It just underscores the need for DAO-based charities even further. And then I do love protocol DAOs. They are the leading model, not just what we're doing, but Uniswap and Compound and Aave and Synthetics and all of these DAOs governing technological networks is just such a beautiful thing, especially with the legacy model of the internet being surveillance capitalism and taking your data and making trillions of dollars off of it without paying you anything. So that's what's going to lead to the new internet in my mind, above all else, this willingness to DAO and these protocol DAOs controlling the structure of the new internet we're building. And then as to another thing I'm bullish on, like I said, don't just get involved in DAOs. Go to conferences, see talks about DAOs, listen to podcasts about DAOs, find people that you really admire. And this space we're in, it's especially the DAO space of crypto, it's so early. In many cases, you can just eventually get directly connected with these people without much effort. When they see your work, when they see you're a big fan of what they're doing, there's lots of people in the DAO space that will directly support you and even be willing to mentor you. And then just for a quick plug, I am very bullish on what we're doing at PushDAO, and we're very open, and we're structuring our programs for next year right now. For example, the grants program, it's exciting how it's evolving because we're going from integrations and more of a wider grants program with a lot of different categories to push apps, the push tech stack apps of the future. So anybody interested in a world in which all communication, social media, and anything you can think of on the internet is collectively run and open source and with guaranteed privacy and ownership, reach out to us too. I'm one of those open people. I'm happy to help anyone in the world DAO, as are my friends at PushDAO and beyond. So in summary, DAOing is as open as it comes. Just introduce yourself on a forum or in some location of a DAO you like, and just jump right into it. It's way easier than getting a job at a centralized company in a good way. People will help you find your place.
No, absolutely. And where can people connect with you online?
So I'm super open in general too. My Telegram is expatcrypto3. My Twitter is expatcrypto3. And then I deal with PushDAO Twitter. I'm one of the people there. So push_DAO. And then you can connect with our entire ecosystem, of course, at the Twitter Push protocol. So on top of all that, though, like I mentioned, just introduce yourself in the forum if you're interested in DAOing. That's gov.push.org.
Absolutely. Well, everyone could get involved with Ian, and let's continue pushing forward the future of DAOs.